some history, passion and pride behind the Lisbon derby, Benfica against Sporting.
It's indescribable. Sporting are everything.
The Benfica fans are the best in the world. That's why we're the biggest club in the world. Benfica are bigger. We're gentlemen, they aren't. They're animals.
It's in their genes.
It's a feeling you can't explain. Being a Sporting fan is something else.
Sporting are bigger. Sporting forever.
We love this club more than anyone can love something. We give our lives for the club.
Benfica Sporting or Sporting Benfica.
Benfica Sporting is the greatest sporting clash in Portugal. This game gets everyone going, and it divides the whole country.
O país e divide o país ao meio.
In Portugal, we say that Benfica Sporting is the derby of all derbies. It's the grandfather of them all. Sporting Benfica goes beyond the country.
Ultrapassa Lisboa, ultrapassa o país.
The derby has great significance for everyone. It's a game everyone wants to play in.
The derby is the derby. It doesn't matter where you are in the league, it's still Benfica Sporting.
Lisbon, Portugal's capital and a goldmine of cultural history. But it's also a football city and home to two giants of the European game, Benfica and Sporting.
Sporting is the club of the aristocracy, the rich, and Benfica is the club of the people. And this fame grew. As people would say, whoever isn't a Benfica fan isn't a real man.
It all started here. Founded back in 1908, Benfica were the result of a merger between Sport Lisboa and Grupo Sport Benfica. It was a working-class club representing a working-class neighbourhood. But few people would have believed that half a century later it would go on to become the colossus of Portuguese football.
Eram homens do povo, gente.
They didn't have a lot of money. They were men of the people. They understood that Lisbon needed a popular club. What they didn't know was that they were founding a club that many years later would become one of the biggest clubs in the world.
Depois, dos clubes maiores do mundo.
Take a short trip to the home of Sporting in the wealthy Rivalidades district, and the difference couldn't be more apparent. Founded in 1906, backed by the Viscount of Rivalidades' wealth, Sporting were very much the team of the elite.
Those who followed Sporting usually were of a higher standing. They were people from the army or navy, doctors, engineers, people closer to the aristocracy than Benfica fans were. This is the reason Sporting are viewed as such. Benfica were more of the people. They had more fans and followers, but Sporting were the aristocratic club.
It was the aristocrats of Sporting, though, who led from the front.
In the 40s and 50s, Benfica were by no means the best team. It was Sporting. The front five became known as the five violins. Incredible players.
Violinos, jogadores extraordinários.
Travassos, Peroteo, Albano, Jesus Correa and Vasquez, the five violins.
They were players who had great prestige, not just in Portugal, but Europe too. I had the great privilege of playing alongside them, notably Travassos and Albano. They were the top players in European football at that time.
But in the 1960s, it was all change. A footballing revolution was looming.
The 60s wasn't just the Benfica era either. It was the decade of the Beatles. A really great time. I think the 60s was the most important decade in the 20th century.
The swinging 60s were revolutionary in every sense, and Portuguese football was not about to be left out. The decade signalled a shift in power in the Portuguese capital and a golden era for Benfica. From being Sporting's poor relations, the club suddenly became a genuine force in European football. Their hero, a Mozambican immigrant known as the Black Panther. Everyone else called him Eusebio.
Partir da década de 60.
Eusebio changed everything. From the very moment he signed in the 1960s, Benfica became a footballing giant. At home, Benfica won twice as many games as Sporting. And that record was mainly down to the Eusebio era of the 1960s.
A partir daquela que eu chamaria a era Eusébio.
José Augusto was one of the stars of that team, as well as one of the world's first attack-minded fullbacks. Yet he's still in awe of the man whose blend of speed and raw power fired Benfica to the very top.
It was a privilege, an absolute privilege to play alongside Eusebio, along with all the other great players that Benfica had at that time. It was really an honour to have helped Eusebio have such a great career, and to witness him become the best Portuguese footballer of all time.
After 15 goal-filled years at Benfica, Eusebio became a legend both for his club and country. But according to his childhood friend Hilario, he could easily have ended up at rivals Sporting.
At that time I spoke to the president of Sporting. I know this really good kid from my neighbourhood in Mozambique who you could sign. And the president said, no, I won't sign him unless he comes here and has a trial first. Obviously we used to give out trials so we could see if a player was any good or not. And so I went back to Eusebio and told him he could have a trial at Sporting. But he said no, I'm not going to have a trial because I'm better than the best player at Sporting.
Instead, Hilario's boyhood friend went on to win it all at Benfica. 2 European Cups, 11 league titles, European Footballer of the Year in 1965 and the European Golden Boot in 1968. Hilario remembers the Lisbon derby of that year well. He was marking Eusebio that day, lucky chap.
It was an attack that came down our right-hand side. I had the job of marking Eusebio. Eusebio got the ball, and when he got the ball he looked up and he saw our goalkeeper Carvalho slightly off his line. So rather than shoot as he normally would, Eusebio clipped the ball just off the ground, and the next thing you know Carvalho was picking the ball out the back of his net. And I felt guilty that I hadn't gone in on him and brought him down. I let him think, and he punished us.
Benfica's success in the 1960s went beyond a national level. They soon became the dominant force in European football, in the process breaking Real Madrid's grip on the European Cup.
Na década de 60, o Benfica está em 5 finais.
In the 60s, Benfica got to 5 European Cup finals. They won 2 and lost 3. And from that moment, Benfica became a force with fans all over the world, not just in Portugal.
and
the fans were mesmerised by the football that Benfica played.
That global dominance is still felt today. The Lisbon derby is watched by fans all over the world. Benfica claim to have over 160,000 associate members worldwide, more than any other club globally.
Benfica is the most important club in Portugal. In fact, it's more than a club. They say that in Portugal, over 60% of people are Benfica fans, while the rest divide themselves among the other clubs. Benfica was the first Portuguese club to gain a worldwide following.
It was here at Benfica's Stadium of Light that Lisbon's finest endured one of their more humbling moments. It's often said the better team loses the Lisbon derby. This was never truer than in October 1965.
Games between Benfica and Sporting tend to baffle you, because quite often the better team tends to lose. In 1965, Benfica had its great 60s team. I remember everyone saying, Benfica are the favourites. They're the better team, they're sure to win. But we were taken by surprise.
On a rainy autumn afternoon, Eusebio and his Benfica teammates were humiliated by Sporting. It was a game that has long prevailed in the memories of most Portuguese football fans.
What happened in this game was something unexpected, totally unexpected. It had rained a lot that day. Benfica also had a goalkeeper who was very good, but very small. And then we had Lorenzo, a very cool-headed player. He didn't get nervous. The derbies didn't shock him at all. On that day, he was simply inspired.
Lorenzo scored a fine hat-trick to lead his team to a famous 4-2 victory. Benfica may have been kings of Europe, but Sporting refused to give up local bragging rights so easily. Their reward, a great win, and they went on to take the title that year as well.
There is no favourite in a Benfica Sporting match, whether you're playing home or away. It's a case of seeing what happens, but there's no way of predicting the outcome.
Few clubs can claim to have Benfica's unique status. Everything is done differently, including their mascot. An eagle is released before kick-off at all home matches. It circles the Stadium of Light, symbolising the club's proud and glorious past.
When the opposition teams see that eagle flying, it can get to them, because it's important to raise the confidence of your own team. When the eagle takes flight, the stadium is buzzing. It gets people going, gives the team a lift. It's very positive.
It's a way of showing the club's symbol, the eagle. And the eagle wasn't flying recently, but now she is. And I think Benfica will be flying too.
The week before a Lisbon derby is like no other. In terms of preparation and pressure, the match is the highlight of any player's season. The game against Porto is pretty big too, but the Lisbon derby is the one the players most want to win.
This rivalry, these derbies, they're built up by the press the week before, and everyone's talking about them. People are making bets as to who will win or who won't win. And all this influences the players. Because as a player, you also live this hype that surrounds the derby.
In a country of 11 million people, 9 million are said to follow the two Lisbon giants. It's a game that attracts the attention of the whole country, and covering every second are Portugal's intrusive press.
Every journalist is looking for a different angle. Every journalist is looking for a different picture. And you have to be careful. You know, you have to be careful on Derby Day abroad, because you can't be seen to be stoking the fire in any shape or form.
Generally, people start talking about a normal championship game 2 or 3 days beforehand. But for a derby, it's 2 weeks before, so you're already preparing for it. Then the media get involved during the week, doing interviews, running opinion pieces. So all this makes the player prepare for the game differently.
As with any derby, the fans are the major protagonists. They feel this match like no one else. To win means to rule Lisbon for the next 6 months at the expense of your close and bitter rivals.
Obviously, the makeup of the stadium is totally different. There's a lot more fans. And so many people take this pressure that they feel in the week running up to the derby into the game itself.
And there can be few more incredible sights in world football than a sold-out Stadium of Light, once the biggest in Europe. It's no coincidence that the ground is known as the Cathedral, as fans come to worship before their heroes.
The atmosphere was crazy, really mad. Back then, there would be over 70,000 fans inside the Stadium of Light. It really was spectacular.
The old Stadium of Light was a very unique stadium, you know, a tier after tier that just seemed to disappear into the clouds. And when that was full, it generated a fabulous atmosphere. There were wonderful games to be associated with.
Following the glory days of the 60s, Portuguese football took a turn for the worse in the 1970s and 80s. Both clubs still dominated the domestic scene, but with the decline of the country's golden generation, neither Lisbon side hit the heights in this era.
In the 70s, Benfica and Sporting weren't at their best. Benfica still dominated in the 70s, but it was the start of a decline. Benfica and Sporting's football got worse in the 70s because the 60s generation was finished.
Most concern lay in the Benfica camp. Having been regularly among the world's elite, there was a sudden drop in standards at Portugal's biggest club. Back in 1980, a derby defeat and a third-placed finish signalled a new low.
The main aim for Benfica every year is to be national champions. 1980 was a year of transition. There were players at the end of their careers. Therefore, it was a bad period, and we wound up in third, which, as you can imagine, in terms of the fans, the club, the prestige, and even financial power, it was a catastrophe, a huge loss. But that's football.
During this period, a new force in Portuguese football emerged, this time from the industrial north. From 1985 onwards, Porto were finally able to break into the country's top 2 and transform the National League.
There was a feeling, because Benfica are the biggest club with the most supporters, that they were entitled to be winning championships, and a Porto from the smaller city and being the smaller club, they sort of ruined the party for Benfica at that time. And I think since I was there, Benfica have won a championship once, and Porto have been dominant.
Between 1984 and 1999, Porto won the Superliga an astonishing 11 times. Their dominance coincided with huge droughts for both the Lisbon clubs.
It's interesting to note that these 18 years of drought for Sporting coincided with the rise of Porto. Sporting won in 1982, but since then, Porto began to dominate and put together great teams capable of winning leagues and cups.
But Benfica and Sporting still managed to serve up some classics, notably in May 1994, a game that would ultimately decide that season's championship. The teams met at Sporting's José Alvalade Stadium and played out a 9-goal thriller.
Nós sabíamos que se perdêssemos esse jogo,
we knew that if we lost this game, then it would be very difficult for us to be champions.
Na generalidade, ninguém acreditava que
And due to being away from home, most people didn't believe we'd go to the José Alvalade Stadium and be able to get a win. So there was a lot of expectation surrounding the game.
Sporting had assembled a team full of star names in a bid to win their first title in 12 years. Yet true to Lisbon derby tradition, the better team was far from guaranteed a comfortable win. Their illustrious neighbours had other ideas, in particular João Pinto, who was to get himself on the score sheet a record 4 times in Benfica's eventual 6-3 win.
We ended up losing 6-3. We had to win the match, so for me it was a really sad derby. We had such a strong, well-balanced team, but we lost a great chance to win the league.
A mini classic that suggested football was still very much alive and thriving in Lisbon. Yet it would be Benfica's last league triumph for over a decade. For Sporting, the wait would be seemingly interminable. Indeed, only in 2000, 18 years after their previous league triumph, was Sporting able to lay claim to being Portugal's premier club again. They did, though, repeat the feat 2 years later. After years of failed attempts, it seems Sporting were finally back to their best. Victory was made even sweeter by the fact their city rivals were struggling. Benfica hadn't won the league since 1994. But in 2005, they too ended their barren spell, largely thanks to a controversial derby victory late on in the season.
It doesn't bring back great memories, because we were still fighting for the title, and we ended up losing a game that we didn't deserve to lose.
Sporting may have had cause for complaint, but Benfica's win and subsequent league success signal that football in Lisbon wasn't yet ready to lay down and die.
Benfica went on to become champions because it was the last day of the season.
Despite the recent renaissance of football in Lisbon, there's little sign that either side will return to their former glories of the 60s anytime soon. Until they do, the considerable weight of history upon both clubs will continue to be a significant burden. The shadow of Eusebio and his celebrated Benfica team of the 60s may never be fully lifted. Now it's up to both clubs, and especially Benfica, to tap into this history to help Portuguese football re-emerge as a dominant force in Europe once again.
The strength of Benfica is enormous because it isn't just a national strength, it goes beyond Portugal. And when Benfica gets a bit of consistency and is regularly in the Champions League or fighting for the title, then they'll definitely attract even more fans and gain more force. This in turn will give them more economic reward, so they can increase the strength of their squad, and so that sooner or later, and I'm hoping sooner, they can obtain the same sort of dimension that they had back in the 60s.
Whether that can happen remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, Benfica Sporting, with its passion and tradition, will live on as the main occasion here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you don't miss the rest in the series of Football Rivalries.